Thanks so much for listening to the Voice of Job Seekers podcast. This award-winning podcast helps provide new job search techniques and tools through relatable voices for the modern job seeker. This episode is the Halloween edition. Well, it's not all that scary actually, but to make it a little bit more interesting, if you want to know more about the podcast, go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com for more info. Enjoy the articles there and join the 1,000 plus subscribers to the bi-weekly newsletter. Today's guest, Scott Behson, is a professor of management of Fairleigh Dickinson University. He has a doctorate in organizational studies and blogs at Father's Work and Family. He is a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review, Time, Wall Street Journal, and many other media outlets. He is the author of the Working Dad Survival Guide, How to Succeed at Work and at Home. Well, not to go back to my scary voice of my attempt anyway. Scott and I discuss several aspects of the parental leave policy as it is now, what he sees as it hopes to be in the future, and how it will benefit job seekers. And right now, as it stands, there's nothing really pushing it forward through the Trump administration. So we talk a little bit about that, though we don't talk a whole lot about it. But just to give you an update and maybe some ideas too on how to navigate that spectrum as you begin to look for jobs and decide where you want to go, parental leave might be a consideration, a major consideration for you. So as we have it, I hope you enjoy the show. How are you, Scott?
Hi, doing great, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Did I have it all right this time?
Yeah, that was great.
Good.
Thanks.
Good. I'm speaking of when I kind of botched a little bit the last time that we were together. So I just wanted to make sure that I had it right. So we are talking about parental leave as it applies to the Trump administration. I don't know what exactly the name of this show will be yet. I don't know if I'll even include the word Trump, but just so that you'll have a reference to go to. And it's not that it's a bad name. I just, when you're sharing on social media, some people have that word flagged, and I just really don't want a whole bunch of ill-advised comments on social media regarding this, because this is supposed to be a positive informational for job seekers or anybody else. So let's get right into it. Now, as we talked before the show, Scott, we talked about really there's only been one or two times when the president has discussed parental leave. And, of course, we know a lot of that has been driven by his daughter, Ivanka, correct?
Yes. So it was mentioned during the campaign briefly, and it's popped up a couple of times, that there would be a proposal for a national parental leave policy. The initial, it's never gotten to be a fully detailed plan, but the original outline really was focused on mothers and maternity leave. More recent versions have used more inclusive language, but again, we don't know really all of the details here. One would hope, if something were to go forward, it could be maybe modeled on what I think are the pretty well-designed programs that we have in 4 states currently. So there is kind of a precedent for, a policy for parental leave that we already have in some parts of the country that maybe could be adopted nationwide.
I see. So in your estimation, have you looked at each of the states that has a favorable or a model that used, and which one, in your estimation, in your opinion, would be ideal or realistic?
Yeah, so California was the first one, and it's about 12 or 13 years ago they adopted it. Then Rhode Island, then New Jersey, and then most recently New York. So I live in New York State and I work in New Jersey, which actually makes me eligible for New Jersey's plan because I pay my payroll taxes in New Jersey.
Okay.
And what the New Jersey plan does, and New York does it almost exactly the same way, and so does California, and so does Rhode Island, is that a little bit of money gets taken out of each paycheck into a insurance program. So much like you pay a little bit of your your taxes out of your paycheck into like disability insurance or unemployment insurance. It creates just a small other bit of money being taken out. And the maximum in New Jersey that anyone could get taken out of their paycheck in a given year is $28. And it funds an insurance system where then you could take in New Jersey up to 6 weeks of family leave, and you get wage replacement up to a certain amount that is paid out of the insurance funds. This is not money that comes out of an employer's pocket. Just the employer has to give you the time off and guarantee your job upon your return. So I think the fact that it's an insurance system makes it a little more employer friendly, and something that is probably a better system than adding another layer of bureaucracy or requirement onto employers, because as you know, especially small employers feel pretty burdened by a lot of these types of issues.
Right, and that's why a lot of them give, because they would. The suggestion is that this would be paid leave and not just like a family medical leave situation.
Right. Yeah. The Family Medical Leave Act, which is 25, 30 years old now, is it allows for up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, but it has a lot of restrictions on it, and actually only about 60% of Americans are actually covered, working Americans are covered under that, because freelancers, for example, or people working part-time, or people who've been working at their employer less than 6 months, so there's all these other caveats. So even our pathetically behind the rest of the Western world's policy, has a lot of people falling through the cracks at it.
Yeah, I find that interesting. The rest of the world seems to have, I shouldn't say the whole world or the rest of the world as if it's everybody else, but a lot of other countries have adopted a policy that's much more flexible and generous.
Yeah, so there's like the Swedens of the world who have like these, like it's up to a year and all this other stuff, and part of what they're doing is they're trying to I guess they're having like a population crash going on, so they've really bulked up their benefits for parents and for new parents as a way to encourage people to have more kids. We don't have that problem in this country, but I don't see why we couldn't have the same level of benefits that you see in like Australia or the UK or Canada, who are countries that are similar to us in many ways, culturally and business wise. So ideally for me, I'd like to see something where there's federal policy that allows like a floor for a certain amount of parental leave, and then employers can go above and beyond it. So I'm working with several employers, and actually these two recent clients I had, one offers 12 weeks paid parental leave, fully paid parental leave to all employees, and the other relies on FMLA and does not actually provide any paid parental leave at all. And that's where we are in terms of employers. Many of them see like that this is an important benefit that allows them to attract and retain really good employees. And then there's a lot of employers that don't see employees in the same way, right? Or maybe don't feel they can afford the costs associated with parental leave. So what I'd like to see is a floor, where at least everyone's getting something, and then employers can compete above that. Because what's happening is large employers, the Johnson and Johnsons and the Microsofts of the world, et cetera, are offering very generous policies. But you know what? Most of their employees are already pretty fortunate people. They probably make good salaries. They have, college degrees, the whole works. What I'd really like to see is that the hourly employees and, the bartenders and the construction workers and, the home healthcare aides can also really have meaningful policy that can help them in their lives.
Yeah. Now, as we talk, basically, this show's focused around the job seeker.
Yeah.
And so there are job seekers who are looking to change. A lot of them are transient at this point. They want to transition to another career or perhaps a side gig that would help them build a career that they're going to be happy with for the long term and not just the short. So is it unrealistic for a job seeker to consider that parental leave as part of a package in consideration when they're weighing their options?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any job seeker, especially if you're applying to larger employers, I think it's a very legitimate question to ask in the second interview, to ask about what the benefits packages are, including support for working parents, and then obviously if they bring up the fact that they have generous leave policies or they allow for flexible work arrangements or something like that, that would be a really good indicator. I understand it can be treacherous, especially for women job seekers, to ask specifically about parental leave because there still is, maybe that puts the seed in someone's mind. It's like, oh, why are they asking about this? Or are they pregnant now? And they're just going to, they're looking for somebody to they're looking to get over on us to have us pay for their, for this benefit, even if they're not going to be here for long, which is a persistent thing. There's laws against it, discriminating against pregnancy status, but I can understand why particularly women might feel a little, not as free to ask some of these questions. So maybe couching it in the form of, tell me about your benefits package as it relates to working parents, as opposed to maybe asking specifically about maternity leave or paternity leave right up front.
Yeah, recently I had one of my followers had actually asked me about, compensation as a whole. And parental leave was a small part of it, though not a large one at the time. And one of my responses was, that's why referrals are kind of or advantageous. You can also ask the person that's already an employee about those policies that are available, and even they'll be helpful even sending you the copy of the policy. Now, what I also recommended was for them to ask the employer again about it in a general way to see how specific they are and how transparent. And that can tell you a larger story about who you're working for.
Yeah, I think inside information is very important, as you note. I'd also say that something like Glassdoor.com could give you some idea about this. There's also a website specifically around kind of working moms issues called Fairy Godboss.
Yes.
So that could be a really good site for this. I know that the New America Foundation is trying to capture what parental leave policies are around the country. I'm actually part of that effort. And there's also something called the It's Working Project you could check out where people are sharing their success and not so success stories and many of them being enabled by their employers around kind of balancing work and family in a broader sense, not just a parental leave kind of approach. But there's places where you could get this information. Working Mother Magazine has their lists of employers. Fatherly.com has a list of employers that offer paternity leave and equality between maternity and paternity leave. So the information's out there if you want to do your research.
Sure.
Most companies also have Twitter feeds and and other things where you can maybe ask questions or something like that on a relatively anonymous basis. If you have your Twitter handle is not your name, so to speak, or something like that. So there's different ways to maybe get some information. But I would, here's the deal, especially if you're in a fortunate position where you're pretty marketable, I think you could be confident asking these questions. I suppose if you're, in a more desperate situation financially, you have to judge how much you can, look for these types of policies or be upfront about your need for them.
And people can also search some of the hashtags that are on Twitter, like Parental Leave and others that would help not only give you some resources to go to, but also some, a view of how people are experiencing parental leave through their companies. And you can probably even search it by company. Yeah,
if I could give just one quick anecdote. A friend of mine who actually I have this anecdote in my book as well. He was a single dad, or he's a divorced dad. So he had shared custody. So he had his son who had special needs, about half the time, and he's interviewing for a job, and he comes right out and says, "Listen, this job is right up my alley. I'd be great for this, and I'm going to kill it for you. But here's the deal. I need a lot of flexibility to be able to care for my son who has special needs. So these are the things I'm going to need from you." And the person who was interviewing him just was so taken with his honesty and his willingness to be upfront about this that, like, he got the job almost immediately, and it's worked out great for them ever since. So sometimes being upfront, is you can't get what you want unless you kind of ask for it sometimes,
Yeah, I find that being forthright is throughout my career, which I think I've really done a pretty good job, and actually so has my wife, though she's had the same job since we've been married all these years. That being forthright and upfront, along with having a decent reputation, really gives you an opportunity to kind of create your own opportunities as far as leave and when you can do it and how often you can do it. Yeah. And it could be modified to whatever your life circumstances are. And that's fortunately has worked out. Others haven't been as fortunate, and I understand that employers are about employers, not just the employees.
I mean, some of them see the relationship differently, and you have to understand your circumstances. So I can't give totally specific advice to any particular listener without knowing their situation, and where they're coming from financially and job history and what employer they're talking to. So you have to read the situation, but understand that you could do your homework with those websites or getting a referral from a current employee, and then also trying to figure out how upfront to be about this, because all the research shows that more and more employees are concerned about family-related benefits, and so it's something that more and more employers have to deal with. So more and more of them are dealing with it.
Right, and I understand too that some people will have to choose of not just how they're getting the job and what the job offers, but where they work. So in many cases, nonprofits are not going to be as generous, and startups aren't going to be as generous, although they might be an ideal landing spot for some people. So in essence, they may not be a workaround unless, of course, you're a first-tier candidate, and you can kind of make you can ask them to cater and customize your workspace for them.
So I completely agreed. The other thing I think job seekers would want to consider, that if you get a job offer and then there's often a negotiation over salary, but you can also negotiate over other things as well. So, maybe more important to you than getting a little bit more money is, can you start me with, an extra few vacation days, or, making sure that there's training days, or you'll pay for me to go to this conference every year. So whatever your circumstances are, maybe that's important to you. So if you can negotiate for, additional paid time off, that might help you balance work-family considerations, or if you have to deal with health issues for anyone in your family, that might be something that you can negotiate over. I mean, you might not always be successful, but instead of just negotiating over one thing, if you have, okay, well, maybe you can't do anything for me on the salary, but hey, can you do something for me in terms of paid time off? You could build a package that's maybe better for yourself.
Yeah, we've talked many times about thinking about the total compensation package and not just the salary. So that can open your world of opportunities a little bit more and get you to think more about what your life will look like as opposed to what your bank account will look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's important. Scott, anything else we need to know before we close it out?
Yeah, well, just, in terms of, just to bring it back to your original question about, parental leave policy, I'm not particularly optimistic that there's going to be a lot of legislation and policy enacted in the relative near term. There's a lot of big issues going on in Washington and not a lot of cooperation. So I don't think that many things are going to move forward. I think the thing that maybe the listeners should do is, if you happen to live and work in one of these 4 states, really know what these programs are. A lot of people I know in New Jersey and New York are not aware of the benefit that is offered to them. That's number one. Number two is to ask your if you have a job currently, ask your human resources department what the policies are. If you are a job seeker, do your research. If this is something that's important to you, and it is important for very many job seekers, there's ways to get this information and to be clear about with an employer that this is important to you. So we can't wait for for Congress to really act on this. We should be as proactive as we can be to take care of ourselves and our families.
Thank you again, Scott, for coming on.
Absolutely. Anytime.
You're always welcome, especially when the next book comes out. Again, Scott Behson, the author of The Working Dad Survival Guide, How to Succeed at Work and at Home, and his blog at Fathers, Work, and Family. And the URL is... fathersworkandfamily.com. Yep.
Or if you want to see me at Twitter, it's just at my name, Scott Behson. It has an H in it.
Right. Behson.
You'll probably have that on the website.
Yes, I will have that in the show notes. In the meantime, thank you everyone else for listening. We welcome you back next time as we are approaching the colder months. Hopefully this will serve as a way for information that you can get right at your phone, so you don't have to go anywhere else or to any other device. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.